Welcome back to another explainer. So today, we're exploring what is honestly probably the most powerful, almost magical tool in visual storytelling. We're talking about depth of field and focus. Now, if you're a camera operator, you might just think of focus as a standard technical setting, just a ring you turn to make a picture clear. But today, let's completely reframe that mindset together. Because by the end of this explainer, we're going to see focus for what it genuinely is. A profound narrative tool that literally directs the human eye.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. You're watching a scene. Two people are standing in the exact same room. At first, the person closest to us is perfectly clear, and the person in the background? Just a soft blur. Naturally, we look at the clear person. But then, slowly, the focus shifts. The person in the foreground becomes a soft blur, and the person in the back becomes razor sharp. Suddenly, your attention instantly snaps to that person in the back.
Now, think about that for a second. Nothing physical in that room moved. The camera itself didn't move an inch. But the entire story, it just shifted on a dime. How? Because whoever controls the focus completely controls the audience's brain. You're telling them exactly what is important in that exact fraction of a second.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The power of focus. 2. What is depth of field? 3. 4 factors of focus. 4. The rack focus technique. And 5. Avoiding common beginner mistakes. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. The power of focus. Before we can really master the art here, we have to understand the baseline mechanic.
At its most basic level, focus just means making a subject appear sharp and clear. But functionally, everything that falls outside of that focused area gradually becomes softer or blurred out. So the crucial point is this: sharp equals attention. The human eye is just naturally drawn to contrast and clarity. By isolating a subject in sharpness against a softer background, you're essentially handing the viewer a visual map. You're explicitly telling them, hey, this is what's most important right now.
Moving on to Section 2, what is depth of field? Once we understand that focus naturally acts like a spotlight for the audience's attention, well, that introduces the concept of depth.
And that brings us to depth of field, or DOF for short. Depth of field is simply the range of distance in your image that appears acceptably sharp. Sometimes that range is incredibly narrow, like maybe only a single person's eye is sharp, while the tip of their nose is already out of focus. But other times that range is massive. A flower 2 feet away and a mountain 5 miles away are both perfectly crisp. That choice drastically changes how we experience the scene.
To really cement this, let's compare the two. On one hand, we have a shallow depth of field. This is where only a tiny slice of the image is sharp and the background just melts into this creamy blur. It completely isolates your subject from their surroundings. You'd use this for maximum attention. Think intense emotional close-ups or intimate portraits. On the other hand, we have a deep depth of field. This is where much more or even all of the image remains sharp. You use this when the environment is just as important as a subject. Think sweeping landscapes or a documentary wide shot where the audience really needs to explore the whole frame to get the full context.
Section 3, 4 factors of focus. We know the why and the what, so now let's look at the how. We're going to break down the technical blueprint.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these 4 factors basically act like levers you can pull to shrink or expand your focus zone. First up, aperture. A wider aperture, like an f1.8, gives you that shallow, blurry background, while a narrower aperture, like f11, keeps more of the image in focus. Second is your lens, specifically the focal length. Longer lenses compress the background and give you more blur, while wider lenses naturally keep more things sharp. Third, distance to subject. The physically closer your camera gets to the subject, the shallower that depth of field becomes. And finally, sensor size. Larger camera sensors generally make it way easier to achieve that cinematic shallow depth of field compared to smaller sensors. By mixing and matching these 4 levers, you have total control over the depth of your scene.
Section 4. The rack focus technique. We've mastered the static mechanics, so let's transition into narrative action.
This is the rack focus, also known in the industry as a focus pull. A rack focus happens when you change the focus from one subject to another during a single continuous shot. It is a wildly effective way to reveal new information, shift the emotional weight of a scene, or guide the audience through the story in real time, all without ever physically moving the camera.
Let's set the stage for a practical storytelling scenario to ground this in reality. Imagine this scene. We're framing a student sitting in the foreground at a desk, deeply engrossed in reading. Far behind them in the background, a second character quietly sneaks into the room through a door.
How do we shoot this?
Well, if we shoot version A with a deep depth of field where everything is sharp, the audience's eyes are going to wander. They'll instantly notice the second character entering while the student is still reading. The surprise is completely gone. But look at version B. We start with a shallow depth of field. The student is sharp, the door on the back is a total blur. The audience is completely locked onto the student. Then, right as the second character enters, we execute a smooth rock focus. The student blurs out, and the entering character snaps into sharp focus. And this brilliantly illustrates the power of the technique. Version B dictates exactly when the audience is allowed to notice that new character, maximizing the suspense and perfectly delivering the story information.
Section 5. Avoiding common beginner mistakes. Let's pivot to our final section and elevate you from an amateur camera operator to a thoughtful cinematographer.
Let's run through some essential do's and don'ts. A massive beginner trap is unnecessary background blur. A lot of new filmmakers get a fast lens and think, hey, every single shot needs a blurry background to look cinematic. But sometimes the location is literally a character in your story, and blurring it out ruins the context. Another huge don't is relying entirely on autofocus during intense dramatic scenes. If your actor moves slightly and the autofocus starts hunting, pulsing in and out trying to find the subject, it instantly pulls the audience out of the emotion and reminds them they're watching a video. That is exactly why manual focus is absolutely crucial when precision matters for clear visual storytelling. You have to choose your focus with intent.
Honestly, this quote hits the nail on the head. Great cinematographers don't use shallow depth of field simply because it looks cinematic. They use it to support the story. Sometimes pulling back and revealing the messy, chaotic environment your character is standing in is vastly more emotionally impactful than just isolating them in a sea of blur. Every single technical choice must serve a narrative purpose.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this provocation. Where should the audience look right now? That is the ultimate question every single focus decision must answer. I want you to burn this into your mind. If you can answer that, you aren't just capturing light anymore. You are guiding minds. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me today. Take this mindset, apply it to your next project, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.